You see a woman wearing a hijab. Before she says a single word, your brain has already written part of her story. Psychologists call this thin slicing, our tendency to make instant judgments based on very little information. And those judgments are often wrong. Today, let's question one of the biggest assumptions people make. Most people think the hijab is simply a head covering. But in Arabic, the word hijab literally means a barrier or a screen. In the Quran, it appears in several contexts related to privacy and separation. Today, when Muslims speak about the hijab, they usually mean the modest dress, including the head covering, that God has prescribed for believing women. It is part of a broader way of life centered on modesty, humility, and devotion. For many people in the West, however, the hijab has come to symbolize just one thing: oppression. But reality is far more complex. For believing Muslim women, the primary reason for wearing the hijab is simple. They believe it is an act of worship and obedience to God. That belief comes from the Quran, which commands believing men to lower their gaze and believing women to draw their coverings over themselves, and from the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Modesty is expected from both men and women. Like every act of worship in Islam, the first purpose of the hijab is obedience to the Creator, even if it also brings personal or social benefits. Many women embrace it willingly because, for them, obeying God matters more than fitting in, even when it leads to misunderstanding or social pressure. Research on Muslim women in Europe found that many adopted the hijab as adults. Many described it not as a burden, but as a meaningful expression of their faith. While this research wasn't about the hijab itself, psychologist Barbara Fredrickson's work on self-objectification suggests that constantly viewing yourself through other people's eyes can increase anxiety and reduce mental performance. Although this isn't the purpose of the hijab, many Muslim women say it helps shift attention away from appearance and toward character, ideas, and personality. But for practicing Muslims, those benefits are secondary. The deepest purpose of the hijab is to seek God's pleasure. Of course, not every woman wears it willingly. In some families and countries, women are forced to cover. Islam teaches that faith must be sincere. While the hijab is a religious obligation, outward compliance alone cannot create genuine belief. True faith begins in the heart, but there's another kind of coercion that receives far less attention. If forcing someone to wear something is oppression, is forcing someone to remove it really freedom? Some countries ban hijabs in schools or public institutions, claiming to protect women's rights while denying women the freedom to practice their faith. That isn't freedom. It's simply another person making the choice for them. Many historians trace part of today's debate back to the colonial era, when European powers portrayed the veil as proof that Muslim societies needed to be civilized. The debate was never only about cloth. It was about who gets to define freedom. For millions of Muslim women today, the hijab represents worship, faith, modesty, identity, and a daily reminder of their relationship with God. While scholars have differed on certain details of how the hijab should be observed, the obligation of modest dress and head covering for Muslim women has been the view of the overwhelming majority of Islamic scholars throughout history. The important point is this: if you assume every woman in a hijab is oppressed, you've ignored the very thing you claim to defend: her ability to think, believe, and consciously live according to her faith. The next time you see a woman wearing a hijab, remember, you don't know whether it represents worship, you don't know whether it represents faith, you don't know the promise she made to God, you don't know the journey that brought her there. You only know that your brain formed an opinion in a fraction of a second. Maybe the biggest barrier was never the hijab. It was the assumptions you placed behind it.